You should have minded your own business, you meddling old fool. Now you're going to pay for it just like he did. Those were the words, spat at me across a freshly polished mahogany foyer, that finally shook me awake. They were colder than the February rain outside, and sharper than the betrayal they implied. I'm Alara Vance, and I had just buried my only son, Julian. I was 75 years old, a widow for 2 decades, and a retired high school English teacher who thought she'd seen every shade of human wickedness in 38 years of grading teenage essays. I was wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong. The woman who spoke those venomous words was Serafina, Julian's wife of 2 fleeting years. She stood there, a vision of designer black wool and icy entitlement, with a man I later learned was named Vance looming behind her. Vance, a granite-shouldered contractor with a cruel, knowing smirk that made the hair on my arms stand up like antennae. Julian had been gone barely 24 hours. The house still smelled faintly of the lily bouquets from the funeral. A cloying, sweet scent of finality. Serafina. "Dear," I said, steadying my voice. The same voice I used to quiet 5 rows of 10th grade miscreants. "I think you must be distraught." "What on earth are you talking about?" She didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, and the movement was predatory, like a cat watching a mouse. "I'm talking about this house." "Ilara," she announced, her voice dropping to a low, ugly timbre that held no trace of the grieving widow I'd witnessed at the graveside. "It's mine now. Vance here is starting the renovations next week. You have until Friday to clear your things and find somewhere else to grieve. This little gift Julian gave you was a mistake, and I'm correcting it." My heart, which had been splintered and bruised since the state trooper's call, now seemed to freeze solid in my chest. Julian, my kind, generous Julian, had bought me this house 3 months ago. The deed was in my name. It was the Colonial on Willow Creek Lane, a place I'd walked past for 30 years, dreaming of the perfect spot for my rose garden. The deed is legally in my name. "Serafina," I managed, my hand gripping the cold newel post of the staircase. Serafina laughed. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was the sound of broken glass grinding together. "Oh, Ilara, you really don't understand how the world works, do you?" Julian was going to contest that. Said you manipulated him right after his big windfall. He felt pity, but he was going to fix his error. Since he can't, I'm handling his affairs. And this house is one of them. Vance stepped forward, filling the doorway with his bulk. "Look, lady, we can do this easy or hard, but the crew shows up Monday. We start demolition on the kitchen. Open concept. You're out." I stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of my son's love courses, the faint scent of his favorite espresso blend clinging to the air, the uneven scratch on the oak floor where he'd dropped a tool during the move-in. Yesterday, I'd watched them lower his coffin. Today, I was being evicted by a gold digger and a thug. It was a violation so profound it transcended grief and settled into a white-hot, paralyzing rage. I looked at Serafina's glittering, pitiless eyes, and in that moment, the former English teacher, the grieving mother, the fragile old woman all dissolved. Only the fighter, the survivor, remained. "Very well," I said, picking up my purse. My voice was suddenly calm, almost unnervingly so. "Friday, I'll be out. But I'll be taking everything that Julian truly cared about." They didn't see the promise in my eyes. They only saw a defeated old lady. They left without another word, driving away in a massive, mud-splattered pickup that was certainly not Julian's style. As I watched the truck disappear, a dark, cold certainty settled in my gut. They hadn't just stolen my home. They had murdered my son. To understand the depth of their crime, you have to understand Julian. 3 months before, it had been mid-November, and the first dusting of snow coated the old town square. Julian had called me into his new office, a loft above his flagship coffee shop, the Vance Blend. Julian didn't sell coffee. He sold an experience. He'd started with a single hand roaster in my garage, funding it with student loans and sheer, terrifying grit. 2 years ago, his small batch artisanal coffee roasting company had been acquired by a national chain for $32 million. "Mom," he'd said, his eyes shining with that familiar boyish excitement, "I sold the dream. And the first thing I'm doing is securing yours." He handed me the key and the deed. Willow Creek Lane. The house was everything I'd ever wanted. A 3-bedroom colonial, a wraparound porch, and a kitchen that smelled like sunshine even in winter. I'd raised Julian alone after his father died in a factory accident. I worked 2 teaching jobs, lived on instant oatmeal, and sold the last of my silver to pay for his first commercial roaster. I never regretted a single sacrifice. "You don't owe me a thing, sweetheart," I'd wept, hugging him tight. "I disagree," he'd whispered into my ear. "I owe you my life, Mom. And this house? This is just where you start living the rest of it." Serafina had been there too. Blonde, sharp-boned, and 10 years Julian's junior. She'd married him 6 months after the acquisition, a whirlwind romance that always felt to me like a business transaction. At the celebratory dinner, when Julian announced the gift, I noticed Serafina's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd sipped her champagne and murmured, "It's so generous, Julian. You always spoil your mother." The word spoil held a peculiar bitterness, a note I filed away for future consideration. Now, standing in that house 3 months later, all the warmth of Julian's gift had turned to ash. I sat down at the breakfast nook, tracing the pattern on the granite countertop. Julian had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to the accident, distant, secretive, checking his phone with a frown that dissolved into a forced smile whenever I asked what was wrong. The accident itself defied logic. Julian wasn't just a good driver. He was an obsessive one, especially regarding his car. It was a 1970 sky blue Mustang, a classic he'd spent a fortune restoring. The police report claimed he'd missed a tight curve on the old mountain road, a road he drove every weekend to check on a farm where he sourced special beans, and slammed the car into an ancient oak. They claimed the speed was excessive, about 70 mph. But here was the thing. Julian treated that Mustang like fragile crystal. He never sped. More importantly, the police noted the lack of skid marks. It was as if he'd simply driven straight into the tree without even touching the brake. And the car, which should have been a mangled coffin, looked almost clean on the damage photos. A crushing blow to the front end, yes, but the cabin itself seemed intact. Cause of death? Internal trauma, the medical examiner had stated dryly. He wouldn't have suffered, Mrs. Vance. That didn't comfort me. It only fed the suspicion that had been gnawing at my soul since the funeral. At the graveside, I had seen Vance. He was in a dark, ill-fitting suit, standing at the edge of the crowd, watching Serafina with an intensity that wasn't grief. It was proprietorial. He was at my son's funeral, a full day before Serafina presented him as her new boyfriend and renovation expert. The terrible possibility solidified in my mind. Cold and hard as granite, Julian's accident was no accident. My first call was to Geraldine. Geraldine Thorne, my colleague for 20 years, the art teacher, the one who retired and started a second career as a police sketch artist for the state attorney's office. Geraldine wasn't discreet. She was connected. "Ilara, I'm so sorry." Geraldine's voice was warm, thick with genuine sympathy. "Geraldine, I need a favor. Not a friend favor, a professional favor. I think Julian was murdered. And I need a specialist's contact. Someone who installs things. Tiny things." Geraldine didn't hesitate. "I know a man who works with surveillance for high net worth clients. He's the best. I'll call you back with the details." It was time to stop being the grieving mother and start being the relentless English teacher, the ones who taught their students to analyze, to gather evidence, and to build an airtight case. The next morning, I drove to the local precinct. Detective Anya Sharma, maybe 35, sharp-eyed and skeptical, was assigned to me. "Mrs. Vance, I understand your distress," Detective Sharma said patiently, tapping a pen against the police file. "But the toxicology report is clear. Mr. Vance had alcohol in his system over the legal limit and trace amounts of an extremely potent sedative." "Sedative? That's impossible," I exclaimed, leaning forward. "Julian never drank heavily, and he certainly didn't take sedatives. He was obsessed with health. He'd barely taken aspirin. The report doesn't lie, ma'am. The combination is particularly lethal behind the wheel. We are treating this as an accidental fatality due to impaired driving." I paused, absorbing the inherent bias in her tone. To her, I was just another mother in denial, clinging to a sanitized image of her deceased son. "What about his wife, Serafina?" I asked. "Did you look into her background?" Did you question her movements that night? Detective Sharma raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Vance, we conducted a thorough investigation. There is no evidence of foul play. I'm sorry for your loss, but sometimes a tragedy is just a tragedy. I left the station defeated, but my resolve hardened. If the police saw only what was on the paper, I would find what was under the paper. The next afternoon, using the key Julian had given me, I went back to the Colonial. I was there, I told the movers, to collect Julian's cherished collection of first edition American poetry books. The house was already a monument to erasure. Serafina had packed away Julian's travel photos, replaced his comfortable leather chairs with stark, modern pieces, and even cleared out the faint traces of coffee aroma that always followed him. She was not grieving. She was clearing a crime scene. I headed straight for Julian's office. His laptop was there, password protected. But I knew the code. It was the name of his childhood dog, Skipper, and my birth year, 1948. What I found made the blood pound in my ears. Julian hadn't just been researching divorce lawyers. He'd been researching her. The browsing history showed searches for Nevada marriage records, insurance fraud investigation history, and identity theft convictions. 2 weeks before his death, he had downloaded a detailed report on a woman named Jenna Walsh, who vanished from Las Vegas after her wealthy, elderly employer died under suspicious circumstances. More chillingly, I found a draft email in his secure cloud storage, dated just 3 days before the accident. Mom, if you're reading this, I need you to know I love you. I've discovered something horrific. Serafina is not who she says she is. Her real name is Jenna Walsh, and I believe she is responsible for at least one other death. I have collected critical evidence and hidden it in a secure location. If anything happens to me, you must contact Detective Anya Sharma and give her the key taped under the bottom drawer of my old desk in the apartment. She's getting suspicious, Mom. I'm scared, but I have to make sure she's stopped permanently. He knew. My brave, brilliant son had figured it out and was planning to expose her. And he had been killed for it. I frantically photographed the screen, the bank statements showing large, unexplained cash withdrawals on days Serafina had claimed to be at a yoga retreat, and the name Jenna Walsh. The sound of a heavy truck crunching gravel in the driveway sent me scrambling. Serafina was back. By the time she walked in with her arms full of shopping bags, I was holding a copy of Robert Frost's North of Boston. "Oh, Dorothy," she said, using the wrong name as a deliberate slight. "Still collecting relics? I thought you'd be gone by now." "I'm nearly finished, dear," I replied, my voice sweet and harmless. "Just taking this first edition." Julian cherished it. I made a show of packing the books, all the while thinking, "You can have the house, Serafina. But you've forgotten one thing. I taught Julian how to fight, and I taught him how to think, and I'm still here." Friday morning arrived, gray and unforgiving. I was wheeled my last 2 suitcases out, having packed only what I truly needed. "Goodness, Alara, look at all this space," Serafina chirped, surveying the empty foyer. Vance stood beside her, his arm loosely draped around her shoulder. "We really appreciate you being so cooperative. It makes things so much easier on everyone." Easier for the murderer and the accomplice, I thought, managing a shaky smile. "Of course, dear. I just want what Julian would have wanted too. Peace and resolution." What I didn't mention were the 4 tiny, wireless cameras strategically placed throughout the house over the past 3 days by Geraldine's contact, a meticulous, retired spy named Clive. 2 were hidden in the living room molding, 1 in the kitchen clock, and 1 subtly nestled in a large, antique porcelain doll I'd forgotten to pack in Julian's old office. Each camera fed directly to an encrypted drive and an app on my new tablet. Whatever they planned, whatever they discussed, I would be watching. I would be listening. "Well," I said, taking one last, lingering look at the house my son had gifted me, "I suppose this is goodbye." Serafina actually leaned in and delivered a dry peck to my cheek. "Take care of yourself, Ilara. And remember, the roads are tricky this time of year." It was an unsubtle threat, delivered with a smile. I felt a surge of adrenaline that was better than any cup of coffee. I drove away, parked 6 blocks away at a coffee shop, and opened the app. The screen immediately lit up with crystal-clear footage of Serafina and Vance already in the kitchen, their masks discarded. Vance was on the phone almost immediately. Yeah, it's done. The old bird is gone. We're clear. Phase 1 complete. Tell Leo to meet us here tonight. We need to expedite the paperwork on the life insurance. 2 weeks max, life insurance. Julian's policy. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Serafina appeared in the frame, wrapping her arms around Vance's waist from behind. What about the police? What if they revisit the case? Vance scoffed, turning to face her. What investigation? They closed it. Drunk driving fatality. Your boy Julian made it too easy. One little extra ingredient in his after-dinner espresso. Wait for him to get behind the wheel of that fancy old car, and boom. Problem solved. The room around me, the scent of stale coffee, the chatter of afternoon patrons, seemed to warp and fade. They had killed him. They were discussing the murder of my son with the same casual air one uses to plan a grocery list. You're sure about the police, Vance? I hate loose ends, Serafina pressed, her voice chillingly cold. Did you make certain the car looked like a genuine accident? Relax, babe, Vance said, running a rough hand through her hair. No skid marks, head trauma from impact. We just needed to make sure he was impaired enough not to brake. The vintage car was the perfect touch. They figured he was showing off. I saved the video file, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped the tablet. I had it, the confession, but as I sat there listening to their callous voices, I realized the full scope of their danger. They weren't finished, and I was next. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my sterile new apartment, taking meticulous notes while watching the camera feeds. Around midnight, a nervous, twitchy man in his 50s, Leo, arrived. He was the insurance contact, clearly the weak link in their chain. Vance, I don't like this, Leo whispered, anxiously glancing at the windows as he accepted a beer. The old lady has been asking questions. Detective Sharma is a smart woman. My colleague at the department says she ran a flag on Serafina's social security number. It pinged a former name. Serafina's eyes narrowed. The old bat. I knew she was trouble. What kind of questions? Vance asked, his voice low and dangerous. About the toxicology report. Specifically whether they tested for anything besides alcohol. She's poking around, Vance. She's not grieving. She's investigating. The three of them sat in silence, the tension in the room thick and palpable. Then Serafina spoke, her voice flat, emotionless, and terrifying. Maybe Alara needs to have an accident too. She's old. She's been erratic since Julian died. Who would question it if she took a misstep down her new apartment stairs? Or maybe her brakes failed on that steep hill near the lake. Vance was nodding thoughtfully. Actually, that's not a bad idea. We clean up the loose end before she causes real trouble. She's got a decent little policy herself. 50 grand, enough to make it worth the inconvenience. My fingers instinctively pressed the save and send to backup buttons on the app. They were planning my murder, debating the method and the paltry price on my head. Leo bolted upright. I helped you with Julian because he was going to expose Serafina and ruin the whole operation. But killing old women? I draw the line. Relax, Leo. We're just brainstorming, Vance sneered. But the look in his eyes, cold, focused, purely predatory, confirmed he was already planning my demise. They settled on a staged car accident, an elderly driver losing control near the lake where the sharp drop-off was notorious. Vance promised to set it up within 2 days. I closed the laptop, suddenly feeling very cold. They wanted to play games. Fine. I had 38 years of experience dealing with arrogant, entitled sociopaths. They just happened to be teenagers then. My first call the next morning was to attorney Philip Chu, a fierce criminal defense lawyer I knew by reputation. I didn't need defense. I needed a tactical edge, Mrs. Vance, Philip said after hearing my story. Video taken without consent is tricky. Defense attorneys will call it inadmissible eavesdropping. What we need is a confession recorded in a public place during a meeting they attend voluntarily, where they confess to criminal activity. That changes everything, I smiled. The teacher in me loved a challenge. I know just the place, and I know just how to lure them there. My next call was to Detective Sharma, the skeptical young officer. Detective, I want to report a credible threat against my life, I said. That got her attention. Within the hour, she was back in my apartment looking at the vague, menacing text message I'd received shortly after their brainstorming session. This could be anyone. Mrs. Vance, she repeated, what if I told you I have reason to believe Serafina and her associate murdered my son and are now trying to kill me for the insurance money? I pulled out my tablet and played a carefully edited clip. Just Vance talking about cleaning up loose ends and Serafina discussing an accident. Nothing that proved murder yet, but enough to show they were conspiring to harm me. Detective Sharma's skepticism finally cracked. Mrs. Vance, I need you to give a full statement tomorrow, and I need you to trust me implicitly. I didn't give a statement yet. I gave her a location. My old tech student Daniel, now a sound engineer for a major news network, set up the old mill property, an abandoned, massive grain warehouse 10 miles outside of town, with professional-grade audio and video surveillance. Detective Sharma, 3 uniformed officers, and I were positioned to execute the final trap. I sent Vance a text from a burner phone. Leo told me about the Alara problem. I can help. Meet me tomorrow at the old mill on Industrial Road. Come alone. A concerned friend. At exactly 3 p.m. the next day, Vance's truck pulled up. He stepped out alone, looking around nervously, confirming my assessment of his arrogance versus his intelligence. I walked out from behind a derelict concrete silo, and his expression crumpled from suspicion to shock, and finally, murderous rage. Alara, what in God's name are you doing here? He hissed. Waiting for you, Vance. We needed to talk. You sent that text? You old witch. You're playing games you don't understand. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket. Oh, I understand the game perfectly. I know you killed my son, Vance. I know you drugged him and sent him to his death. And I know you're planning to do the same to me. I kept my voice calm, conversational, maintaining the teacher's tone of absolute authority. You're crazy. Julian died in an accident. Really? Then explain this. I pulled out the burner phone and pressed play. Vance's own voice, clear as a bell, discussing the extra ingredient in Julian's espresso and how the old bird bought the whole grieving widow act. His face went white. Where did you get that? Does it matter? The question is, what are you willing to do to keep it from reaching the police? Now, tell me why, Vance. What was worth killing my Julian for? He glanced around, realizing he was completely exposed. He seemed to make a decision, to confess to me, hoping to somehow bribe or intimidate me into silence. Fine. You want the truth? Your precious son was going to divorce Serafina. She'd been married to him barely 2 years. We'd get nothing. She'd lose the entire syndicate we'd built. Syndicate? We killed him because he was about to destroy our future, Vance spat, his eyes alight with genuine frustration. Serafina and I have been together for 4 years. Before she married Julian, she targeted him for his company. He was just the latest mark. We've made nearly $3 million in the last 5 years, Alara. We scout the wealthy, lonely ones. She charms them, gets on the policy, and I handle the technical aspects. Julian was going to ruin it all with his damn snooping. My blood ran cold at the scope of their depravity. And now you're a problem too, he finished, his hand moving quickly into his jacket. Too bad you came here alone, Alara. Who says I'm alone? The massive fluorescent warehouse lights blazed on, startling the pigeons nesting in the rafters. Detective Sharma's amplified voice echoed through the space. Police! Hands where I can see them, Vance! You are under arrest. He spun, eyes wide with horror, realizing he'd walked into the most meticulously planned trap of his life. As the officers cuffed him, Vance stared at me with pure, distilled hatred. You think this is over? Serafina will never talk. You can't prove anything about the others. I simply smiled. Oh, Vance, you have no idea what my son has already proven. While Vance was being processed, I was watching Serafina on my tablet. She was frantic, pacing the foyer, calling Vance's phone repeatedly. Detective Sharma and I arrived at the Colonial just before dusk. Serafina Walsh, Detective Sharma said, showing her badge. We need to speak with you about your husband's death and new evidence that's come to light. Serafina's performance was breathtaking. Evidence? I don't understand. This is harassment! Marcus died in an accident months ago. We entered. I stood silently as Detective Sharma played Vance's confession. When Vance's voice filled the room, detailing their 4-year relationship and the murder of my son, Serafina's perfect composure finally shattered. But instead of breaking down, she rallied, her face contorting into a mask of righteous fury. "He's lying! He's trying to save himself by blaming me. Vance was obsessed with me, Detective. He threatened me when I wouldn't leave Julian." She was good. She was a master manipulator. "Then why?" I asked quietly, interrupting her performance. "Do I have video of you, taken 3 nights ago, planning my murder in this very kitchen?" Serafina's eyes narrowed, a flash of pure animal fear before it vanished. "That's not my voice. That's manipulated audio. Vance has been threatening me, trying to make me go along with his fantasies." Detective Sharma nodded to me. I played the final clip, Serafina's own voice, clear and cold. "Maybe Alara needs to have an accident too." The performance dissolved entirely. The woman I had known as Julian's beautiful wife was gone, replaced by the predator, Jenna Walsh. "We've arrested Vance, and he has already implicated you in multiple interstate fraud and murder schemes, including the death of your employer, Mr. Arthur Jenkins, in Nevada 4 years ago," Detective Sharma said, delivering the final blow. "We have your financial records, your alternate ID, and we have your husband's detailed investigation." As they read her the rights and placed the cold handcuffs around her wrists, Serafina looked directly at me. The hatred in her eyes was a physical thing, something you could taste. "You meddling old fool. You should have kept your mouth shut." "Julian's death was my business, Jenna," I replied, calm and collected, the teacher closing the lesson plan. "And you picked the wrong mother to mess with." The greatest surprise, however, came 3 days later. "Mrs. Vance," Detective Sharma told me at the station, a gentle smile on her face. "We searched Julian's safe deposit box, the one he mentioned in the draft email. He had amassed a complete, irrefutable dossier on Serafina, Jenna Walsh. Financial records, copies of falsified documents, photographs of her meeting with Vance in other states, even a full timeline of the other victims. My brilliant son had died trying to be a hero, but in the end he had succeeded. His evidence, the culmination of his investigative genius, would convict his own killers. And there's one more thing," the detective continued, sliding a document across the table. "The life insurance policy Serafina was so desperate for? The $2.7 million? Julian changed the beneficiary 3 weeks before he died. He left everything to you." My eyes filled with tears, not of grief, but of profound pride. Julian had ensured that even in death, his love would prevail, and his betrayal would yield nothing but a prison sentence for his killer. 6 months later, I stood in the packed courtroom. Serafina Walsh, Jenna Walsh, and Vance received sentences of life in prison without parole for multiple counts of murder in the 1st degree. Justice was served, solid and final. I used the insurance money to do something Julian would have loved. I started the Julian Vance Foundation, dedicated to helping the families of cold case murder victims navigate the legal system and hire private investigators when the police have closed the book too soon. We've already helped 4 families get justice. I bought back the Colonial on Willow Creek Lane, but I didn't move back in. I couldn't. Too many ghosts. Instead, I sold it and purchased a quiet cottage by the sea with a perfect spot for my rose garden. I'm 75 now. I faced down a pair of cold-blooded killers, outsmarted them using the very skills I taught in a classroom, and proved that being an old woman doesn't mean being a fragile one. I always told my students, and later my son, to trust your instincts. When something doesn't feel right, keep digging until you find the truth. It took me a lifetime to follow my own advice, but better late than never. I learned that grief can be transformed. It doesn't have to break you. Sometimes it builds a foundation of iron, strong enough to fight for the truth, smart enough to outthink the wicked, and brave enough to risk everything for justice. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys, even the old ones, really do win.